Hello, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Ricky. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, very ready.
So, I would love to know more about little Stacy. What was she like and what did she dream about?
Little Stacy was a very shy, sensitive, but sweet girl who was surrounded by a lot of love and support growing up. That has really been my foundation. And she dreamed of either being a professional tennis player at one point because I was a competitive tennis player since 6 years old through D1 in college. So, aside from that, I remember wanting to be a veterinarian because I've always loved animals. I think that was a very short-lived dream. And then also, my parents remind me that I always said I wanted to be a teacher because I didn't want others telling me what to do, but I wanted to tell other people what to do. So, those were some very early dreams of mine that I remember. And I was born in 94. I grew up with all the Disney princesses. So part of me had always dreamed of finding a soulmate.
I love that. And as you look back throughout all these um, people and roles that you potentially wanted to take on, were there any early signs of the operator in you or the person who really brings structure to chaos?
Yes, there was definitely, I would say, just in my personality, the way that I am naturally. For example, when I was little, I was always the one coloring within the lines while my friends were sitting across from me drawing all crazy and colorful outside the lines, or I'd eat a popsicle really neatly. And I remember my best friend, like a very early memory, she would have red and blue dripping all over her face and down her fingers. So I know that sounds kind of silly, but really from my core, who I am is kind of an organized, neat person. Um, and I would say I am just kind of an operator where I naturally find it easy to create structure out of chaos. And I think that really translates to being an operator and being in the BizOps space and what I'm doing in women's health today. But that's something that I've always gravitated towards. I think breaking down really large, gargantuan tasks feels simpler to me when I break them down into small, shorter goals that are much more attainable. And I've found ways to do this in my personal life just through goal setting and within my career. But I think that has always come naturally to me as well.
I love that so much. And I love how you framed it as having a BizOps brain and your mentions of the goal setting as well. How do you feel like you built the skill over time and really nurtured the part of you that had the skill through these exercises and really deepening into the skill set so that listeners can really reflect on their own backgrounds and strengths, but also look to really sink their teeth into applying some of these skills in their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that I've always done and was taught to do from a young age is to say yes to opportunity. And that is something that has given me, because now sitting where I am today, a core strength to being a leader as an operator is having this zoomed out view and being a very good listener that can kind of place themselves in every person's role that they're working with because I align essentially every department in our org. And to be able to do that successfully, you need to be an empath. You need to have a high EQ. You need to understand what each team member's priorities are and what their challenges are and maybe what their bottlenecks are. And so from the get-go of my career, I had actually started in sales, but I said yes to sales at Oracle, not because it was something I really wanted to do. I didn't want to sit there and cold call people. But I knew through folks that I'd spoken with that it's a really great way to start your career. I think some other guests you have had on this podcast have said something similar. It teaches you that it's kind of that first step of what I'm talking about of having the zoomed out lens because you really see how different people in a business function. You get rejected on a daily basis. You have to be creative with how you speak to many different personalities. And so that was a fantastic way to start developing and flexing that muscle a little bit. And as I moved on and other opportunities came my way because I was saying yes, because I was putting myself out there, I eventually was able to move into an internal operator role. And it was the first of its kind BizOps role that I stepped out of my role at Google, where I was in sales as well, into the first of its kind at Shopstyle over 8 years ago, which is a Rakuten company. And it was functioning like a startup within an enterprise conglomerate environment where the path was not paved. There, I was able to create processes from scratch with my boss. Honestly, sometimes had no idea what I was doing, but was learning on the fly, was willing to make mistakes and learn from them, being very ego free. I think that's a really other big um, necessity if you are going to try and step into the space and become a leader. And with every reorg and reshuffling and rebrand that we experienced, which was quite a few, I'd always said yes to acquiring a user ops team member or a legal ops team member, learning marketing ops. So eventually, that zoomed out lens grew and grew and grew to position me to be in a very good spot now where I'm sitting with an executive team and helping guide them with strategic decisions. And yeah, I know that was kind of a mouthful, but is there anything you want me to dive deeper into there?
I loved the overview and thinking about it in the context of saying yes and being so open because that can really lead people to having those various experiences. And I loved how you framed having that zoomed out worldview and just am so fascinated by your background in sales and how it intersects with how you described yourself as being more introverted and shy, because I'm sure that really pushed you out of your comfort zone in the most beautiful ways to really shape how you're a leader today. And between the the reinvention and the reorgs that you experience in the corporate world, as well as what you've navigated throughout your personal life and holistically across all areas of life. What I'm so curious about is how that skill set can really translate to navigating moments of overwhelm and reactivity, really for listeners who may be feeling overwhelmed and or reactive in their life right now. How can they start thinking a little bit more like an operator and think of that big problem area that they have in their life as something that they can tangibly break down after they've said yes to the moment and to really take a leap toward it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that what I always come back to and what I practice is embracing stillness. And I know that I'm a yogi. I'm going on on a meditation retreat in a few weeks. I'm really working on this part of myself, but I actually think it's so applicable to being in the BizOps space. Not only because you're sort of very often the person listening in the room and speaking only when it's the right moment, being very tactful with how you ask questions, how to encourage people to work better together. So much of that is being comfortable in stillness, in silence, really being in tune with yourself and what you are hearing around you to act appropriately. I know that that sounds a little bit, maybe like, how do I start doing that? What does that really mean? And so, some examples of how I practice this in my day to day is now my non-negotiables every morning are I journal with my coffee, I do my morning pages, I get all the cluster out of my head, which is like, I need to do this today, and I have to remember to call this person and email this person. It sort of gets all the anxiety and stress out of your head and onto paper. And then you can start really being creative on that paper too, if you write long enough. The next thing I do is I always go on a morning sunlight walk to boost my circadian rhythm, to manage my cortisol levels, my mood, boost my creativity. It feels like an energizing cup of coffee before you even have coffee if you do this walk. And this really sets the perfect foundation for my day. And I think that anyone who puts something like this into practice will see that you can get rid of that overwhelming feeling very, very quickly. And something else I always come back to is breath work before a really big presentation, before I'm in a stressful room with an executive team, before I have to tackle a really complex project and have no idea how I'm going to break it down. Always come back to your breath. It's really fascinating how we don't notice how we're breathing throughout the day. And very often it is staggered, it is short, it's almost inducing our anxiety. And if we learn to practice mindfulness and stillness with our breath through forms of meditation or yoga, we see how our feelings are very much in our control and with our brain power too.
I love that so much. And I could not agree more. That is really how I found myself in the wellness space. And these were the exact tools that allowed me to make sense in a really confusing and chaotic period of life, which I'm sure people have found their own tools throughout their journeys, but particularly during the pandemic. That was a moment where I really was able to deepen into all of these tools and layer them. And there's definitely something to be said about knowing you have a tool and being able to use it before an executive meeting. So I am just celebrating everything that you've done and you've experienced and that you've shared so beautifully because it makes such a difference. And it's not easy always to find those moments of stillness or to be able to write down those thoughts when maybe it feels easier to keep them in our heads and pretend like they don't exist. But I am right there with you with my morning pages and my coffee walks and my breath work, both in my living room or co-working space or wellness room at work or the bathroom a moment before a big presentation. So thank you for sharing those tools. I love them so, so much. And what I love is that through your experiences, both personal and professional, you've been able to use those tools to not only become a leader in your space as a strategy director and chief of staff, but also build your newsletter, Eggs and Ops, and your app, Dita, which serves women who've experienced pregnancy loss. How did these come to be? And can you take us back to when your own fertility journey began?
Yeah, so my fertility journey began actually a little bit before my husband and I first decided we're okay with getting pregnant, okay with not being so careful. And that was back in 2022 when I was diagnosed with uveitis, which is often called iritis as well. I had a horrible stomach bug where the inflammation in my gut caused inflammation in my eyes. And I have 20/20 vision. This was terrifying. I basically what happens is the inside of your eyes swells so much that if you don't get it under control with eye drops, and see a doctor, you could potentially go blind. Now, that does not happen often, but the pain that I was feeling in my eyes and my vision blurring, um, I was on steroid eye drops for a couple of months and my vision wasn't back to normal for 2 or 3 months. It was blurry. It was insane. And this experience made me realize how interconnected your body is. The fact that something happening in my gut could cause this in my eyes made me take a second and really think about my health differently because I'm someone who's always, I've been proud of my health. It's part of my identity, my fitness, what I consider to be healthy. Um, but we learn that there's so much going on underneath the surface and everything is interconnected. And so I just want to put a pin in that and say that was really when I started to realize this. And also that our healthcare system is filled with quite a few band-aid solutions and not always helping us get to the root cause. I started speaking to some holistic um, doctors and clinicians who had experiences as OBs but we're shifting towards holistic because it gives you an opportunity to look at root cause more. And so, flash forward to 2024, our wedding night was May 18th. And that was when I stopped taking my birth control. I forgot to take my pill, and I had been on it for 15 years, which I just want to flag that too. I will come back to birth control. I had been on it since the age of 15, got married at 30. I did take some breaks. I did switch to some different forms, but let's just say I was on it for 15 years. I stopped taking the pill, and my husband and I went on vacation to Hawaii 2 months later, decided we will no longer be careful, immediately got pregnant. And I am someone who's very trust the universe. I'm pretty chill. I go with the flow for the most part. And so I thought, wow, this is so easy. What is everyone talking about? Um, and then unfortunately, in January of 2025, had a miscarriage. Went to the appointment where the ultrasound did not find the heartbeat. And this was the most devastating experience of my life, probably of my husband's life too. And um, that was sort of the first real reality check that what people have been talking about, what women have been talking about, it's true. And I felt like, I think this may resonate with some women, that I had done everything so perfectly on paper with my career, with my MBA, with my tennis, just everything. And I didn't understand why my body had failed me in this way, or at least that's how I felt, though that is not the truth. And we often blame ourselves as women for these things, and that is not the truth. So, did some testing, turned out the fetus had a syndrome that just happens randomly at cell division, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just completely at random. So we were like, okay, that was a complete fluke. We will recover from this. I had a DNC procedure for that. So that's where it's done medic or surgically at the hospital by your OB. After I recovered, we tried again. Same story, got pregnant right away. No ovulation strips, not trying aggressively for months. It was really like quick. I wasn't even tracking my ovulation very closely. I didn't have my Aura ring yet. Um, and then had another miscarriage. This one was much earlier. It was about 4 weeks in. And so, absolutely devastating. This felt like a real blow. Um, and after kind of recovering mentally from this, giving myself what I like to call a no fucks period. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, but
No, you definitely are.
um, And I also just want to say, I think this is so, so important and part of the framework that I've built and something that a friend and professional in this space who I consulted with taught me is giving yourself the grace to not owe anyone anything, to just focus on recovering, to cry in bed every day if you want to eat whatever snack you want, not respond to your text messages. Do that for as long as you need to and give yourself a deadline, but say, up until then, I'm not giving any fucks. That really helped me because I'm not good at just laying on the couch and being a piece of shit. It's really, really hard for me to just turn off my brain. But that was so important for my recovery. And I think many women don't spend enough time doing that. And sometimes we think we're further along than we really are. And I just cannot say enough how important that phase is. And so decided that we wanted to take some action into our own hands, do as much testing as was available to us, and really push for that, advocate for it, because those who have been through this experience or um, have other health conditions may know that it's actually really difficult to get all the lab work done that you ask for. It is really, really frustrating, and that's how companies like Function actually came to be. That is a piece of the system that I think is so broken. Um, but that's like one thing too, where I realized the system is not built for us in so many ways. There are some staggering facts about women's health that blew my mind. One being that 1 in 4 women have a miscarriage, way more than we think. People feel so isolated and alone in this, and it's really taboo to talk about, but it's very, very common. The other is that I'm just going to look at some facts here because I really want to share them, and I don't know all of them by heart, but only 7% of healthcare research focuses on conditions that exclusively affects women. Just sit with that for a second. Also, erectile dysfunction, which affects 19% of men, has 5 times more research than PMS, which affects 90% of women. I talk a lot about facts like this on my Substack, but I just wanted to share a couple here because I think when we hear that, it really starts to resonate how big of an issue there is here and how little research there is done on women. And so throughout this journey, throughout the frustration and the anger that I felt once I got out of my no fucks phase, started speaking to some friends, my cousins, my coworkers. People started sharing stories with me that I never knew until I opened up with them. And I realized that I was not alone in this experience and that my experience actually was not even that bad to what some of my closest people had gone through. And I started realizing there's a really, really big problem here that I am going through this and telling my boss that I'm just out sick for a couple of days and then returning to work 2 days later. I, if men had to experience a miscarriage, how would that look? What kind of benefits would we have at work?
The world would shut down.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the more that I spoke to people, which is also phase 2 of the 3-step framework I set up in Dita, is connection. It's speaking to other people because you realize you're not alone. It fuels you to maybe want to do something about it or to open up more, and it's healing. Speaking with other people is healing, and it's a really important step of the process. And then finally, when I felt ready to start doing the lab work, to see a fertility clinician, by doing some research and understanding with my husband, coming up with our non-negotiables, just like we did for our wedding, which was also a really good tip. Um, know that, for example, we know IVF and IUI are a last resort for us, and we want to try naturally first. Just sitting down and understanding what is most important for you, what is a priority, and how can you base your research and actions around that. And so that is how I found and through speaking with other women too, got recommended the most amazing fertility clinician. It's how I found my OB, who I love and adore, who performed my DNC on me. And she forever has a very special place in my heart. And finding the right supplements to take, um, basically just forming steps of action that got me to where I am today. And I don't have a baby right now. I don't know when we are going to start trying again. But what I do know is that through these steps and some actions that I took, which, by the way, got a therapist for the first time in my life, a career coach, really focused on this level of stillness and meditation, like I mentioned, I've been practicing, really looking inward instead of for external validation, knowing myself better than I ever have in my life, not caring what anyone else thinks, because I've just gone through hell and back. And I just, for the first time in my life, can say, don't care what anyone else thinks. And it's the most freeing in the world, freeing feeling in the world. Um, it's gotten me to this place of feeling confident and back in my own skin and just feeling like myself again. And I realized that I want to help other women do the same. So that was a very long-winded story of explaining how I first started writing again. I always knew that I loved to write and that I loved photography. Those are my creative outlets. And I always was like thinking, how can I ever create a business out of this, or at least put it out into the world, or flex my creative muscle a little bit. And so I started writing on Substack first as a creative outlet, but also to set up these frameworks and guides for other women who are navigating a very overwhelming, chaotic, and confusing world of women's health, where the answers are not clear. You have to come up with your own questions ahead of time before you go to the doctor's office. You need to advocate for yourself because no matter how amazing these doctors are, they are so busy. They're being pulled into surgeries and delivery rooms left and right. You have to be your own biggest advocate. And so just some like helpful tips around that, some supplements I've learned to take, some podcast books I listen to or read. Um, just wanted to start helping. And I think that's how I started picking up some traction. And that's really how the app was born too. It's to set up this three-step framework through the form of affirmations, which I actually got the idea because my husband gave me these little like these little calendar things you could
I
flip
love those.
when I was really down in the dumps, like in my darkest days. And it's so simple, but really, really helps. And I wanted to sort of bring that to life in app form, and I didn't know how. But now with vibe coding, anything is really possible. And so I started working on it and then eventually came up with something tangible that I could share with other people. And it's currently in beta and testing with about 20 people. And so, yeah, that's how we got here.
Thank you so, so much for sharing your story and not holding back on any of the pieces that made it difficult or any of the resources you used in really taking us into those moments because similarly to what you experienced, I think for me, just like knowing stories broadly helps me because just the proactivity of listening to different situations and going through possible scenarios, I think is something that I've developed both as a curiosity and also through work in analyzing different failure scenarios. And I'm so, so grateful for all the resources you're sharing through the Substack. I think that is definitely something that I'm going to take a deeper dive in, specifically with the podcast episodes and the books, and just hearing your journey with the supplements and the potential providers and how that felt. One of my biggest curiosities is that through the framework you described, you were able to transform what felt so emotional and human into something that you were able to apply operational thinking on, which is your gift. As you yourself have walked through the process, what are things that you wish you could tell the version of you that had just started this journey? Besides reading Eggs and Ops and using Dita, which we will plug in the show notes, what are the things that you wish you knew that now you think, oh my gosh, oh, if only I'd known this before?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also what I look to share now with other women who are looking to get pregnant soon or just want to get on top of their health. And so the first thing is that birth control is often a band-aid solution for some underlying health conditions that need to be taken care of then and there. This is something that I learned through a few podcasts that I listened to and books I read. Dr. Thais Aliabadi speaks about this very often. I highly recommend looking into her work. But PCOS and endometriosis are two leading causes of infertility. And very often, when young girls come in with their moms at 13, 14, 15, saying, I have really painful periods, or have cystic acne, or something with their weight, birth control is immediately slapped on. And then those symptoms are forgotten about for many years. And then they fester and they grow and they lead to infertility sometimes. That being said, I'm not against birth control. I just think that women and young girls and their mothers deserve to know the long-term consequences of taking it for a long time, how it can impact your hormones, the way your brain functions, your fertility, the underlying causes that it might be masking. So that is one thing I would say. If you are someone like me, and I think people in my generation, there are many others out there who have been on the pill for a long time, take that seriously, look into it. Birth control is fantastic for preventing teenage pregnancy or unwanted pregnancy. I do think it has a place in our system. Again, I just think we need to be aware of all the real side effects, not just maybe blood clots like we were told 15 years ago. And now it's just come out that some of it is a group 1 carcinogen. So I will leave that there. That's the first thing. Second is that trimester 0 is very, very real. The prep that comes before the Stacy in Hawaii who says, let's just be less careful now and maybe get pregnant. There is a lot of prep that goes into it 3 months before to give you and your partner the very best chance. I wish this is something I took more seriously and knew the details of. For example, no drinking alcohol, no smoking weed, because this impacts your egg and your sperm quality. Quality over quantity, by the way. I think there's a really big focus on quantity of your eggs and how you get older and that decreases. But really, it's the quality that's really important because I am a living example, though some of it is unknown, but the quality can determine the outcome of your pregnancy and whether you deliver at full term or not. There's also a million different supplements you can take. It can be really overwhelming, but taking prenatals that have folate is very, very important. CoQ10, NAC. I talk about this in detail on my Substack. And I also just want to say that I am not a medical professional. I don't want to say that I recommend this and please take this, but it is something to look into for prepping your body for the best outcomes. I often talk about it in the form actually of your metabolic soil and comparing it to a garden or a new plant that you're trying to plant. I think that's the simplest way to look at it. If you were potting a new plant, you wouldn't do that inside of dry and unhealthy soil, right? Think about your body as the same. If you're trying to bring new life into this world and plant a seed, don't do it in unhealthy, potentially unhealthy soil. Work on that soil. Make it as healthy as possible so that the seed that you are growing can blossom and eventually bloom into a fruit or a flower, aka the baby. I think that's the simplest comparison to make, and it makes a ton of sense when you think about it that way. I also, I'm going to come back to this again, and I wish I knew it, that the system was not really built for women. I already touched on it, so I'm not going to harp on it too much longer. There are some resources I'm happy to share. Um, but just knowing that makes you so much more aware when you're going into these doctor's appointments, understanding that you have control of what you speak about in the appointment. You have control of what tests you want to ask for and push for. Even, just don't be afraid to feel like you're nagging the doctor, but ask all the questions. Come prepared. And those are the key things that I wish I knew and I want to get across to others. The very last one, the male is 50% of the equation. There is a very outdated narrative that so much of it is about the woman, but 50%, it's the sperm. It's the sperm fertilizing the egg. The man has to do work on his routine, on his body. And by the way, things that we focus on that are just a baseline foundational layer for health, which equals healthy or your fertility, is focusing on sleep, prioritizing it, your stress levels, knowing how to manage them, exercising, a diet that consists of whole, unprocessed foods. These are all non negotiables just in your health and in how you start to navigate your fertility journey. I'll leave it at that because I could go on and on, but I think those are the key things.
Those are so, so incredibly helpful. And I'm so excited for listeners to dive into your Substack to really read more about how you've described each of these things. And it's such a gift because, as you said, it's still a topic that isn't fully being discussed online. It's getting traction, but everything that you're sharing is so incredibly helpful for both first-time moms as well as people who've already been on their journey, because as you talk about it, it is so healing to hear as you shared that, hey, someone else is going through the same thing. So thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing everything. One thing that has made me so curious is at the start, you mentioned living in the in-between and in the stillness and really being grounded in that through the practices that you described. And I suspect that there is a lot of intersection between using those tools as well as being able to navigate the research to be able to pose those questions to your providers and to find a provider that you connect to and to uncover questions you may not even have known, or to ask for help, or to even go through step one of the framework to give no fucks. All of that requires that stillness. And I'm so curious as to how that intersection has looked like for you and how you've been able to honor those things between the research, yourself, finding those moments of stillness. What does that mean to you now?
Yeah, and just so I make sure I'm understanding your question fully, are you essentially asking what living in the middle or in the in between means to me and how I translate that?
Yes, especially for this journey of researching and asking the right questions and connecting with these providers and being able to give no fucks. It's such a plethora of to-dos, and this is outside of all the work to-dos and things in all the other areas of our life. And I'm so curious as to, yeah, what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think it can sound overwhelming for someone who is maybe just getting started on this journey, that there are so many things to consider, so many different resources to read or listen to, or people to speak with. And that's a little bit how I felt when I started, which is why I created this all in the first place, especially eggs and ops. But, and that's where the stillness and leaning into being in this in between in the middle really comes in. It's sort of like the cliche of it's about the journey, not the destination. I more recently have really been enjoying this space and having the time of my life. There is no time quite like it because it's right before we have a baby and grow our family, hopefully. But the discoveries I've made about myself along the way through the work that I've done on myself is part of this journey that's leading me to the destination where, for example, when I started working with my therapist and my career coach, I realized that there were so many underlying issues about my pregnancy loss that weren't even about the loss itself, that I was tucking away and almost hiding with the idea of motherhood. A lot of it had to do with feeling really stagnant in my career and wanting something more. I knew that I had wanted to grow some sort of business on my own. I'd been with the company for over 8 years. I'm actually departing at the end of this month to focus on something new, to grow this business. And I was always tucking that away. And that really came to the surface with this, with the loss. And I mentioned this concept of not caring what anyone else thinks about me. This is the first time in my life I can truly say that. And I think it's the most important piece of being happy with yourself, of knowing who you truly are, of being true to yourself, is getting rid of any caring what anyone else thinks externally. It's very difficult to do. And I'm talking even your parents. I come from an immigrant. I'm a first generation Latvian American. I struggle with that. It's a big immigrant mentality issue. And I love my parents. I'm so close to them. But for the first time, I'm doing things only for me. And that has come out of being in the middle and in the in between and the work that I've done on myself. And I'm now this new and improved, more confident version of me who is taking more risks, who is speaking this vulnerably about my personal experiences out to the world, who is connecting with other founders and women who are in this space and realizing that there's this greater women's health revolution happening. And you cannot find these things about yourself and grow unless you lean in to this middle ground where you focus on the present, not the past, not the future, but you focus on the day to day. Something else that has really enabled me to do this is to lean into my creative side. I'm currently reading The Artist's Way, which is a really incredible book. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Yes. Yeah. What week are you on?
I'm actually, I'm like 25 pages in.
Oh my gosh, it is such a journey, and I'm so excited. I'm on week 6, and I had only made it till week 4 last year when I was gifted the book. And I was told that it's really hard to finish. So people like creatives take years, founders take years, they have accountability groups. But if you do not make it through, just give yourself grace and celebrate being in the middle of it, which I totally have. And I'm looking to work through week 6 now.
Okay, good to know. I think I already was a big journaler, so the morning pages make sense to me, but I'm really excited to keep going. And another book that I read in this time that has been life-changing is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Speaks a lot about being, it's very, it's tied to yoga practice and meditation as well, but it's about leaning into the present, not letting your mind wander too much into the past or the future, and just to lead with an open heart. And once you expel this type of energy into the world, it will return itself to you. And I've really started to experience this in the form of what are signs to myself. And this type of creativity in my day to day helps me be a better wife, a better colleague, a more available sister and daughter, and productive builder in what I'm creating. And so I think leaning into creativity is actually really, really powerful, especially as we enter this world of AI and think about ways we can differentiate ourselves. Um, And also, I've I've been vibe coding because I vibe code the app, and I've realized this is another huge form of creativity because you're taking something out of your head and creating something, and even a day or a week that couldn't have existed without a developer before. And as someone who doesn't have that background, that's just been really fascinating too. So all these things I've been able to accomplish and also new friendships I've been able to make in this time wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in the in between.
I love that so much. And I think in the past, I've struggled so much with being in the in-between and hearing you share everything that you experienced and your meaning making of it all is so beautiful. It's something that I want to go back and listen to and journal on. And this week in particular has been a huge week for me to practice presence because we can from my experiences with coaching, something I keep learning and relearning is that we know these ideas and we have a connection to it. And then in the in between, we can sometimes disconnect and then we connect back to it and we have a remembering and then we forget. And then sometimes we find our way back to it and then we remember again to open our hearts, to breathe deeply, to let that breath really go all the way into our bellies and for it not to be stuck in our throats or our chests. And I am so grateful for all of these reminders and this perspective, which is so beautiful because it isn't about, oh my gosh, when will I get there? This is the whole point of it, and just to celebrate all the synchronicities and the creativity. I mean, this podcast exists as a love letter to creativity and something that, as a consumer of podcasts, for me, has just felt very intuitive to make. It's something that I feel should exist as an extension of who I am and all the questions that I have of incredible women like yourself. So I'm so, so grateful for all of your reflections and all of your wisdom and all of your vulnerability. And I would love to dive into the rapid fire questions, which do not have to be very rapid at all. And my first one is, what does wellness mean to you today?
Wellness to me means the people taking control of their health. We have AI at our fingertips that can help us resolve issues that in the past we could only go to doctors for. And for people who don't have the privilege or the resources to do that, for the first time, we can use this type of technology to our advantage to be healthier versions of ourselves. That is what it means to me.
What does leadership mean to you?
Leadership to me means leading with an open heart.
I love that so much. Is there anything else that you would like to share or expand on?
Yeah, I think when you asked me what little Stacy was like, I mentioned to you that I was raised with a lot of support around me and love. And something really special about that was I was raised with um, many of my grandparents. So I had three grandparents and one great grandfather around me. My parents had me very, very young and moved here from Latvia in 93. And then accidentally, we call it a happy accident, got pregnant with me. And so they say it takes a village. I felt like I was raised by my community of grandparents and my parents and this beautiful family around who supported and loved me so much and gave me the foundation to be successful because of how much they believed in me. And many successful people talk about how having at least one person who really believed in them, that gave them this belief in themselves, is what enabled them to be so successful. And I feel that on so many levels from my upbringing. And I think when people, whoever's listening to this, if they think about those people in their lives, just come back to it and remember how very special that is.
Oh, I love that so, so much. And I'm so grateful that you're writing, that you're building, and that you're sharing. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I learned so much, and I know that folks listening will definitely jump right into your reading. And I'm so excited to see how Dita comes to life. And yeah, I'm so grateful. Thank you so, so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ricky. I really enjoyed the conversation.